Good,
Kashif, how are we
man.
doing
Pleasure to be
today?
here with you.
Yeah, excited to have you on. We were just talking a little bit off air. I had the pleasure of getting to hear you speak at Low Carb Denver a few weeks ago, I guess maybe about a month ago now, and was really just like blown away by the message that you had, kind of your personal anecdotes around what you're doing at the DNA company. And then, actually, the person that's heading up your affiliate program had reached out to me either right before that or after that, and was like, "Hey, have you heard of the DNA company?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I just like listened to Kashif give his presentation." So was really excited to get to have you on today. So yeah, I mean, I think to kind of kick things off, would love to just hear a little bit more. Typically I don't do a lot of background stuff with people. I think it's kind of a waste of time to hear a lot of people's backgrounds because they talk about it on other podcasts. But I think yours is like particularly unique to the message. So would kind of love to just kind of kick it off, getting into that and hear more about your background and how you got into
Yeah,
DNA
sure.
and
So
starting the
I don't
DNA
come from
company.
this world, right? Like I think it required somebody looking from the inside to fix everything. It was a really messed up situation. So
Hmm.
and like most sort of functional medicine type stories where people are truly dealing with the root cause, it usually starts with somebody being sick and being failed by every doctor and then having to figure things out themselves. And like,
Hmm.
I actually have something here and I need to help more people. And that's exactly what happened to me. So I was in the sort of startup world. So I had a marketing company that would help in Toronto. We have this big thriving startup scene. I would help them grow, do the things that they didn't even know they needed to do. And all of a sudden I got sick. So about 5 years ago, I got eczema, psoriasis, migraines, gut issues, and depression all in around the same time within months of each other. And I was going to five different doctors, taking five different pills for five different problems. And the question I kept asking, because I had never been
Hmm.
sick really before that, was why is this happening? What did I do wrong? It just made logical sense. I must have pulled the wrong
Hmm.
lever and something broke. And the answer I kept getting was like, we don't
Hmm.
do that here. It's like we tell you what you got, we tell you what pill to take. So I started diving into sort of functional medicine, integrated medicine, learning about how the body works. Never had looked at that before. And I started to dive into my own genetics and said, there's something here, but this tool doesn't work. Like it really sucks the experience. So I started to experiment with it and I learned
Hmm.
that I was missing key detox genes that support the gut. And the food that I was eating was completely misaligned to my body. And I was literally suffering from autoimmunity,
Hmm.
didn't know it, didn't understand it. And I was able to heal myself. So fast forward 5 years, I haven't been sick a day since then. Other than getting hit with COVID a couple times. I haven't really been sick. But
Yeah.
meanwhile, these were things that I was told that I have that I just have to take pills for and manage. So somewhere along that line, we
Hmm.
started funding the research, building, a pool of data around all these conditions that people have. And I kind of learned that it's all optional. If you're not born with it, you don't have to have it.
Hmm.
The pace at which you age, you can determine the way your body performs, your energy levels, the quality of your sleep. All of that can be adjusted to its optimal if you understood your genetic potential. And that's why we built what we built.
Hmm. That's awesome. And I think that's, we have this conversation quite a bit on the show that I think you're right that it takes somebody actually experiencing something like that, like what you experienced, to be able to create what you've created, because, it's because your intent is different. You're starting with like the personal experience of trying to treat yourself. You're starting with a passion that's like different from somebody who is, just trying to start a company to make money, right? Like you're doing it to solve your own problems, solve the problems of your family members. And I think that really comes through in the work that you're doing, and the passion when you speak too. I know the story that you shared at Low Carb
Mm.
Denver, which I think was about your niece, that we can get into if you want to later in the show. It really comes through that like you're doing this for the right reasons. You're trying to help people. I'm curious. You mentioned that you kind of started experiencing these symptoms a little bit later on in life, and I think for a lot of people listening to this, we're talking about DNA and genetics. The natural question would be, well, if this was something that you had like a genetic predisposition to, why did it come out later on in life? So, was it something that did come out later on in life, or did you have symptoms of this when you were younger, but maybe they just weren't as strong, or kind of how
So
did that come
your
about?
mitochondria is quite resilient, and your body, as you're younger,
Hmm.
will fight things off. And what happens is, as you age, there's two things happening. First of all, your mitochondria are depleting, so your ability to actually fend yourself and
Hmm.
fight off all these things is lowered. Second thing that happens is there's a certain level of beating your body can take. And eventually that bucket gets overfilled.
Hmm.
Our current reality, the threat of environmental toxins, food, pesticides, everything in our cleaning chemicals, like everything, it's an overload. And so there's a certain amount we do have
Hmm.
detox systems because we're expecting to meet with toxins, but not the volume to which we meet them at. So what's happening is, um, yes, when I was younger, I felt certain things like asthma I was told I had, which I got over. I had some kind of migraine issues when I was really young, got over it. But it all kind of exploded into this cornucopia of all these problems at the age of 38, because that's the tipping point where that inflammatory level that my body was fighting, it could no longer fight. The inputs of the food and the
Hmm.
toxins and the chemicals and the stress and lack of sleep became too burdensome. So the system failed and all these symptoms started
Hmm.
poking out. It's also my body aged. Hormone levels are declining. Mitochondria is depleting. The cells are just struggling with whatever's going on. So there's that threshold. Most people, the average American gets their first chronic disease at 55. The average American has 2 by the time they're
Mm.
65, and they spend the last 15 years of their life in treatment. That's typical right now, right?
Mm.
So for me, it happened a little bit earlier because my genes are just unique, where I have really big red flags and holes, so I wasn't able to fend it off until 55.
Got it. No, that's really interesting. We've talked about this. I think Dr. Anthony Gusson, we had him on, and we were talking about that kind of symptom threshold thing where, yeah, like a lot of time, like there's this threshold where you start to experience symptoms when you surpass it, like you've mentioned. And, a lot of times, like whether it's because of your youth or even just because of the actual volume of, in this case, the toxins that you're exposing yourself to, you're just not quite surpassing that threshold. And then whether it's through increasing the exposure or, as you pointed out, aging and all the things that come with that, you end up kind of surpassing that. And I think it's, I always kind of compare it to, like, I remember, when I was in college, I could eat, pizza on a Friday night, drink beer, like not get any sleep, be like stressed out with school and everything. And I played basketball in college,
Yeah.
and I could still wake up the next day and play basketball and I'd be completely fine. And now at like 30 years old, it's like if I have 3 beers and a pizza, I'm out for like a month. I feel like, like I can't, my body can't like tolerate it anymore. So I do, I want to continue to get into the DNA side of things, but I'm curious on the mitochondria side, because this is something that is obviously a huge topic right now. As we're kind of realizing such a high percentage of people, at least here in the U.S., but I think globally, are suffering from metabolic issues. What we're really talking about is mitochondrial issues. And this is everything from mental health
Mhm.
disorders to chronic diseases, cancer, all these different things. What is it about us aging that leads to a decrease in mitochondria in sheer number? Because obviously, we know that as you get older and you start, you continue treating your body poorly, you're going to damage your mitochondria. But actually losing mitochondria, is that because of muscle loss? I know muscle is very dense in mitochondria. Is that kind of correlated with the kind of typical trajectory of losing muscle as we age, or
There's
is there
a
something
couple
else
things.
going
First
on
of
related
all,
to that?
it's not the same for all of us. Your genetics will point to your mitochondrial function and how efficient your
Mm,
mitochondria is dealing with oxidation and all the stressors and maintaining itself. The second thing is our lifestyle is not conducive to maintaining mitochondria. Your body will respond to the stressors you give it. If you signal, "I need youth,"
hmm.
it will give you that. If you signal, "I need to sit on the couch," it
Hmm.
will take the youth away. And so if you're not implementing what's
Interesting.
called hormetic stress, like a good healthy stress, weightlifting, resistance training, breath holding, you know, uh, not chronic everyday problems, but acute lawyer letter in the mail, things that cause the fight response, your body will age because you don't need it. So you're signaling, I don't need it. So you have to
Mm,
actually create those stressors, those healthy stressors to signal not only maintaining the mitochondria you have and the size of the mitochondria, but also mitophagy, like the development of new mitochondria, which you can continue to do. And
hmm.
we're not doing this. We feel like we reach a certain age and we want to relax and we start to act our age. We shouldn't, right? Act the age that you want to be
Hmm.
and you'll maintain that. You'll signal to your hormones, to
Hmm.
everything, how old you want to be. And that's what you'll get, whatever you ask for your body. Then there's food. So we're not eating the things that have things like urolithin A and things that trigger mitophagy. Um, you know, pomegranate,
Hmm.
certain nuts and things, for example. You can look up the things that do that. Um, so those are the big things. Our biggest thing is probably lifestyle. We lay back and we
Hmm.
start acting our age, and that's exactly what your mitochondria gives you back.
Yeah. I think that's a really good insight too about how, if your body kind of is demanding youth, then it's going to respond with that youth because, and I think that's, for depending on who's listening to this, if you're somebody who's younger, I think that's good reason to continue doing what you're doing, continue, playing sports and exercising and, just like what I call play, really just getting out and playing things that you typically stop doing when you get older, because it does seem like it's harder to get that back as you get older. Like it seems like it's easier to maintain that as you get older, than it is to, have to, you go 10, 15 years of not doing anything, living a super sedentary lifestyle, not eating properly. And then to try to get it back, it's a lot harder to get it back when you're in your 50s than, let's say, when you're in your 20s. So I think that's, that's a big thing. But also for anybody who's listening, who is in that 50-year-old range, who hasn't been doing anything for the last 15 years, it is possible. And I think that's what I want to get into with you is that, people like in yourself, for example, you started experiencing these issues later on in life, and you
Mhm.
were able to kind of flip the switch and do things yourself to actually get back on track. So I think that shows that it's definitely possible. To lay the framework for everybody listening here, to kind of get back to the basics a little bit, we haven't really had anybody on here to talk about DNA, or genetics. A lot of the people that come on are kind of talking more about lifestyle, and I think a lot of times we kind of, kick DNA and genetics to the side, almost
Mhm.
as if they're two separate things. Like, we've kind of, and I think this is kind of rooted in, the idea that for so long we looked at genetics as being kind of it's a deterministic factor, like whatever your genetics are is kind of what you're stuck with. And then as we've started to, progress a little bit more in our thinking, we've realized that, like, oh, the phrase of like genetics load the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. It's kind of made us think that, oh, genetics don't matter at all. It's just all about our lifestyle. But as you've pointed out in your own experience and in the story that you told about your niece, there's certain things that we can find out in our genetics that actually tell us what to do with our lifestyle, which I think is, really interesting, and especially kind of on the thread of personalized nutrition and personalized medicine. So to lay that framework a little bit, can you kind of just tell us a little bit more about DNA genetics, why it is important for even the people who are considering, everything that we deal with on the chronic disease
Sure.
front to be
So I
more
think
lifestyle
that
based?
thinking around genetics is not actionable was true based on the genetic tests that were available. Tests that were designed by
Hmm.
PhDs for research, which is this gene means this gene means this gene. You got an 80% chance of Alzheimer's, good luck. Right? That's kind of the output. What do you do with
Hmm.
that information? You then have to go focus on lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
So really what should have happened, which is what we built our own unique algorithm in the way we think, which is it's okay, now that I know I have an 80% chance of Alzheimer's because of some gene function, I have to understand what causes it, the actual biology. Like why do brain cells die? What causes cognitive decline? 66% of today's cognitive decline is inhalation based pollution, chemicals that we're breathing in causes
Mm.
brain cells to die and brain
Wow.
cells to die and brain cells to die and eventual cognitive decline, which we don't talk about. If you're in LA, going for a run, a I think a 1 hour outdoor run in LA is equivalent to breathing a pack of cigarettes based on the level of pollution.
Mm.
Try doing that daily and maintaining your
Wow.
brain health, right? So,
Hmm.
yeah, so now all of a sudden, when you look at things more functionally, which is what we do, functional genomics, not genetics. Genetics says this gene means this. Now figure out what that
Hmm.
means. Functional genomics is
Hmm.
here's how the body works. Let's reverse engineer what gene instructs each step in that cascade. Because there's no problem that comes from a single gene. It comes from a system failure, a cascade failure. When you're looking at your hormones, you can't just look at testosterone because testosterone comes from progesterone and then it converts into estrogen. And it might be cleared before it converts, or it might convert into DHT. You have to look at the map as a whole. Then you can go from
Hmm.
that, you have an 80% probability based stuff to certainty. With certainty, this is what you do. Now, all of a sudden, the second half,
Hmm.
what choices do I make? My epigenetics of environment, nutrition, and lifestyle. The combination of those two is your net. game plan, your genetic playbook, right? You do need both. Understanding your genetics allows you to do two things: prioritize. Here's the red flag. Here's what I need to focus on, right? I have headaches. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know why. It's not about the headache. Here's the thing that's broken at a system level, which is causing the headaches. Second, now I know what choices to make.
Mm-hmm.
I have to change this. I have to add this. I have to
Mm-hmm.
remove this from my life. I need to take this supplement or change this in my diet. That's really the two dials we're turning. And then all of a sudden, you can do what I did, which is reverse your biological age, be disease free. I don't even get a common cold anymore, you know? So, and that's what's possible. And
Yeah.
I didn't think that was possible in the state that I was in, but it is.
Yeah, and I think it's so powerful because it gives more control and power to the average person that's dealing with these issues. You know, I think like you look at a lot of the genes that there's a lot of hype around right now. Like, you know, you mentioned cognitive decline, like the APOE4 gene, where, you know, nobody's talking about what to do with that. It's like, oh, go get it looked at, go find out if you're expressing that gene and see if you have, you know, whatever the stat is, 70% increased risk of Alzheimer's from it. But nobody's talking
Yeah.
about, well, like, what does that mean? Like, what is that gene actually causing to happen in your body, and what can you do to counteract it? Like, it's not good news to just like, if the answer is just that, like, oh, if I have this, I have a 70% increased risk, then I would say, hey, nobody go get your genes tested, because
Yeah.
all you're going to do is bum yourself out because you're not
That
finding
that's
out
a
anything
perfect
practical.
example. So, ev the
Hmm.
most genetic science is rooted on disease-centric thinking. Remember, who's funding this stuff? Somebody's looking for a pharma
Hmm.
solution. So, the pharma solution is
Right.
solving the very last step, which is the symptom. This symptom you're experiencing the day it started, the problem started 10 or 15 years before. Your body will fight and fight and fight and fight until this
Hmm.
thing pokes its nose through and you're sick, right? So ApoE is a perfect example of what does it do?
Hmm.
It's your body's ability to efficiently transport lipids, so cholesterol. And
Hmm.
cholesterol is a hormone which we confuse as a problem, which is actually highly protective and mitigates inflammation. If you have inflammation in your brain,
Hmm.
it sends cholesterol there to repair the inflammation. But if you have a not so efficient ApoE gene, which does the job, it's hard for you to do that job. And so you get buildup and you get plaque. And you get what we call amyloid plaque build up in the brain,
Hmm.
right? So none of this would have happened if you
Hmm.
didn't have inflammation in the first place. Right? We're looking at ApoE to
Yeah.
determine how do you deal with transport of lipids, the very, very last step, which is the thing right before Alzheimer's starts. But why did the inflammation
Hmm.
happen? Is it because of inhalation? The GSTP1 gene determines how efficiently your lungs block airborne toxins from entering your bloodstream. You might be doing well there. Don't need to focus there.
Mm.
For some women, and by the way, most Alzheimer's and dementia cases that we're dealing with are in women, 80%, not in men. It has to do
Mm.
with estrogen toxin
Interesting.
byproducts. So some women are more estrogen dominant, they make a lot more, and they convert that estrogen into a toxic byproduct before having their monthly cycle. If you do that month after month after month after month, and then you get, by the way, into menopause and you don't have a menstrual cycle anymore, you're still making this toxin, but you're not getting rid of it. Plus, you're taking a hormone replacement
Mm.
therapy, adding more estrogen. Plus, you don't understand hormone disruptors in your environment, like the chemicals and foods, etc. Then that load becomes too heavy. That may be your inflammatory risk. It could be stress. For some people, like myself, because I clear neurochemicals so fast, I take on a little bit too much stress. It's just easier for me to do. I'm more reward seeking.
Mm.
That might be my why. And we can go on. There's so many things that cause inflammation. The very last step is how are you mitigating with your amyloid plaque buildup, right? And what pill can we give you to
Mhm.
manage the plaque and keep you there, as opposed to stopping the disease or preventing it in the first place, which is what we're now able to do.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and I get the appeal of, like, looking for, like, a single, you know, solution or a pill. You know, I think for a lot of people, you know, the idea of a lifestyle intervention to improve your outcome is, you know, nobody wants to do that work. But I think what's missing from that conversation is what the impact of a
Yeah,
lot of these different pharmaceuticals are. Like, you know, there's no free lunch out there. Like, all of these pharmaceuticals, you know, whether we're talking about statins or, you know, different mental health drugs, or, you know, the GLP-1s are really big right now, the semaglutides. All of these things come with these side effects that in some cases are far worse than what the original condition is anyway. So people have to know this to kind of motivate themselves to say, okay, it's not about, this taking a pill to try to mitigate the symptom. It's about me actually getting down to the root cause and implementing some practical lifestyle change to improve it. Which, I would love to get into to kind of use as an example, talking more specifically about your case, because I think autoimmunity is something that it's a really hot topic thing right now. I think 20 years ago nobody was talking about it. Now it's being talked about a little bit more, but it's kind of being talked in the sense of every other chronic condition, is that, here's a medication that you can take, not much you can do
Yeah.
about it, just deal with it. I know, my wife was suffering from psoriatic arthritis, which, surprisingly, it actually went away when she became pregnant, and then since having our baby, she hasn't had had the issue anymore. But this was 5 or 6 years ago, and she was prescribed a medication, and in which, at that time we didn't really know much about it, and she started taking it, and even in that case, the doctor was all about, we'll the idea is to get you off of this, and we'll just take it for a little bit. But there was no sort of intervention that went along with it to make sure that she would ever be in a
Mm.
position to get off of it in the first place. So it's almost like these pills are often presented to people as, or pills or injections or whatever the drug is we're talking, as if they're actually going to fix the problem.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you'll take this for a little bit and then it's going to like repair and then you'll be fine. But there's almost no drugs out there that do that. A lot of them are just like managing the symptom, like you mentioned. So, looking at autoimmunity and what you were dealing with, what did you find in your genetics, and what was kind of the practical approach that you took to mitigating what you were
So
seeing
a
in your
lot
DNA?
of what we're finding around autoimmunity is gut related, and it's twofold. So there's
Hmm.
people like me that have zero gut detox and a constant flow of the wrong foods, even though you think you're doing things right. I'll give you an example. There was a restaurant next to my office where, first of all, I made the mistake of eating lunch out every single day, right? And there,
Hmm.
I thought I was eating healthy because I was eating this Mediterranean food, and I was eating hummus like several times a week. What I didn't realize is that in order to transport the hummus to Toronto, there's a chemical that's used to dry the chickpeas so that they can ship it and harvest it faster.
Mm.
And then, of course, you soak them and put them back into their natural state. That chemical is a potent toxin. Right? That chemical is also
Wow.
used in wheat to dry wheat, so that in Canada we can store it because of our long winters, and in Europe it's illegal.
Hmm.
And in Canada it's a staple, like every farmer uses it.
Hmm.
So it's more of an economic question than it is a health
Jeez.
question. That's a problem. So that one thing, yeah,
Hmm.
try taking a poison for lunch every day and not having an autoimmune condition, right? The opposite is also true. We're
Yeah.
finding that and this is where interpretation is so important. Only 5% of people that we studied actually have the ideal gut detox gene. This is why the gut is so important when it comes to uh, disease creation, right? It's in the gut. So
Hmm.
those 5% of people, we figured they're going to be the healthiest because they have this amazing two
Hmm.
copies from mom and dad, amazing gut detox. We found almost all of them had autoimmune conditions. And we're like, what is going on here?
Wow.
So what we realized is our DNA is 200,000 years old as we stand here speaking to each other. We are wired the same as people of
Hmm.
200 to 250,000, approximately that range years ago. Our current reality, our food, is maybe 40 years old. So 1970s is when everything really got industrialized. Our environmental reality is about
Hmm.
150 years old, industrialization, pollution, chemicals. Uh, Modern civilization is only a
Hmm.
few thousand years old versus 200,000 years of habits, which is what we are designed for. The assumption when you're
Hmm.
born is you're being dropped into a 50,000-year-old scenario, right? So,
Wow.
given that,
Hmm.
that ideal gut detox wasn't designed for the constant threat of toxic food entering your gut day after day after day. So the people that are on an average American diet with ideal gut detox do such a good job of detoxing, and you have a constant threat, they end up with autoimmunity because they're fighting the fight so well. So it's really the people in the
Hmm.
middle that have kind of mediocre gut detox that are supposed to be doing well are
Yeah.
actually designed for today's reality. Yeah, and that's a real
Interesting.
it's not medically astute, sort of an astute observation because it's not medically true, but the practical reality is you have to think
Hmm.
about your context. Not the best right now. Our
Hmm.
environment, our food, our stress, our lack
Yeah.
of sleep, that's the reality we have to think of our body in, and how are we thriving in that reality?
hmm That's really interesting because you're kind of getting into this like the passing on of DNA, and this is something that I've always kind of wondered. I have these, somebody like myself is always up late at night thinking about these issues, and I had this thought, not too long ago about how if we're actually headed toward like okay, so this is going to be a little bit long winded, but I think about how people say that like we have only 40 harvests left, right, and we're going to have a hard time producing food, and we're now we're seeing like genetically modified meat just past like the or not
Lab grown.
genetically modified meat but the lab grown meat, yeah, like just past at the time of this recording like a week ago, past like FDA regulation for it, and we're seeing all of these things, and it seems like we're heading towards a future where we're not going to be able to maybe unless we really right the ship, we're not going to be able to produce food in the same way that we've been producing it. And I've often wondered if the people who would be best suited to handle this future world are going to be the ones who currently are eating all of the junk food today, because they're going to be epigenetically modifying their DNA and passing that on to their children. But it sounds like, what is the kind of time frame for that type of thing to occur? Because as you point out, it's only been 40, 50 years since we've kind of been living in this world where seed oils are in almost everything that we eat. Glyphosate is on every single food that we eat. Even the stuff that we think is healthy, like plants or meat, is loaded with all these hormones and chemicals. And we're seeing a lot of people experiencing those issues. Do you see a world in the future where these things, like our body actually is able to adapt to these things and we're actually able to process them in some way that it's going to be more manageable? Or are we really just heading to kind of an end if we continue on this trajectory? Maybe a loaded question, but I'm curious to
It's
get your
loaded
thoughts on
correctly. So, yeah, it takes
it. Yeah.
millions of years to adapt. Yeah, where our genes
Millions.
aren't changing
Mm.
anytime soon. And if you look at the way, so humans are very different than every other species. In every other species, we can see evolution.
Hmm.
We have not seen it in humans.
Hmm.
Right? So when we
Yeah.
study families and we see the same thing over and over again. Here's a gene. There's three potential outcomes for this gene. You get a copy from mom or dad, and you get one of these three combos, right? So I got A version from mom and B version from dad. So I'm now a AB, and maybe mom was a AA and dad was a BB or a
Hmm.
BA, right? Now I can pass on to my kid
Hmm.
either the A and B. It's the same puzzle pieces that we just keep passing on. That's not evolution,
Mm.
right? We aren't changing,
Hmm.
and we're the only species. And this isn't spoken of,
Right.
but we haven't seen evolution in humans. It hasn't. We haven't changed our DNA since the time we understand our DNA existed, which is 250,000 years. In that time, we have seen animals change. Giraffes' necks are longer, things are
Hmm.
going on, there's evolution happening, right? But humans, we haven't seen it. So I don't even know if it's possible to do it in humans. There may be a
Hmm.
revolutionary evolution where all of a sudden we flip the switch and we become something different overnight, but we haven't seen this
Hmm.
constant drip of change at all. So what's going to happen? It's happening. Chronic disease is a $3.6 trillion
Hmm.
industry. It was non-existent 100 years ago.
Yeah.
That's the reality. The reality is
Hmm.
we're all sick. 50% of Americans are expected to have cardiovascular disease. 50% are expected to have cancer. There's nobody left, right? Eh, Everybody is expected to have a chronic
Yeah.
disease by the age of 50. So that's what happens when you have habits that are misaligned to your genetic capacity. There's failure. So what it means is we have to be
Hmm.
hyper diligent about taking charge of our own health. The what's regulatory cleared isn't necessarily good for you, right? Learn, study, do
Hmm.
what you're doing right now, listening to podcasts like this, and implement those things. We are not going to catch up. It's moving way too fast.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a great point. And it's like it's one of the reasons why I don't love, how big, I shouldn't say I don't love it because I think there's a lot of good with it. But a lot of times we like to look towards like ancestral habits and nutrition as a way that we should live today. But as you point out, the landscape has just completely changed. It's like, yeah, you can look at, this group of people hundreds of thousands of years ago who ate this certain way and say that, oh, like as long as I eat that way, I'm going to be fine. But it's like they're not dealing with the same issues. If you look at somebody who was eating plants back then, those plants
Yeah.
weren't sprayed with glyphosate, and somebody who was eating meat back then, well, those that meat wasn't loaded with different hormones and things like that. So we're playing a different game that, like, our bodies, as you're pointing out, just aren't accustomed to being able to play. So it really makes it hard to figure out what to do. So I guess kind of getting back to like your story then. So you go through and you see that like, all right, I don't have this gene for this gut detox, that it's not happening appropriately. So what do you actually do with that information? So you know that that's there. You know that you kind of have this deficiency in your genetics. What's the practical
Well, the big
application there
things
to
I
combat
changed,
that?
that's one of them was gut, and diet right
Hmm.
away, right? I understood that. I also didn't
Yeah.
deal well with toxins that have entered my bloodstream through inhalation, so I don't clear them well. And my office was sitting on top of a company
Mm.
that manufactured stuff, and so they're putting toxic pollutants into the airways daily. So I moved. I literally moved my office. I got out of that
Mhm.
building. Um, I then started supplementing. So there's two dials you can turn: remove the things that your body can't handle, or add habits that allow you to do it as a supplement, meaning that, kind of like
Mhm.
biohack your way through it, right? So I started adding supplements that supported my
Mhm.
detox. That was one. The other big one was sleep. I didn't even know I wasn't sleeping properly until I realized how broken my
Yeah.
sleep was genetically. And it wasn't so much that I can't fall asleep. I can fall asleep during this podcast if you want me to, right? Challenge me and I'll do it.
Yeah.
That's not my
Yeah.
problem. My problem is that I can't stay asleep. So I didn't know that I had a sleep problem because I was falling asleep fine,
Mhm.
right? What actually happens with me is my
Mhm.
serotonin is completely dysregulated. And serotonin, so just like melatonin is the hormone that puts us to sleep, serotonin wakes us up. And then there's a little bit
Mhm.
of cortisol, then you're ready to go, right? So the
Mhm.
signal is supposed to be sunlight coming through the window, peachy glow through the eyelid, and that truly is the signal your brain's waiting for. When your serotonin is dysregulated,
Mhm.
it means that it can't prioritize stimulus and it doesn't know what to respond to. And this is why people like me are maybe a little bit more irritable, more call it like this high functioning anxiety, like everything is a problem. I got to work on everything, right? Because every detail matters. So
Yeah.
same thing happens in your sleep. During that second half, when you're making the serotonin get ready to get up, I'm responding to everything. It's too hot, too cold, blankets getting moved around. There's a there's a house 3 doors down where a dog barked. Like every little stimulus is my
Mhm.
brain saying, "Is it time to wake up?" Oh, that's not sunlight. Go back to sleep. I didn't even know that was happening. Right? I thought that was normal.
Wow.
So I fixed that. That was a major one
Mhm.
because your first half of your sleep is recovery. You're kind of clearing toxins, repairing muscle tissue, making up for all of what you did the day before. The second half, you're kind of, and I'm very generalizing these two halves. There's more to it than that, but the second half is
Yeah.
making and
Mhm.
preparing for the next day. So making your hormones, making your neurochemicals, getting ready for the next day. So I wasn't doing that. So my hormone levels were low, neurochemical levels were low, depression, anxiety, all this stuff was settling in. That was a major fix for me. The other one,
Mhm.
diving deeper into my brain, was understanding how unique I saw the world. My perspective was truly different, which caused me to add stress that I didn't need. And this stress is a poison,
Mm.
and to get into what it does, it breaks. So when you're constantly in chronic stress, uh, you're using up all your adrenaline stores, and that breaks the Krebs cycle, your cell's ability to use oxygen to create energy. And so then your cells start requiring
Mm.
or utilizing glucose instead, and it ferments the glucose, and it uses like funguses and other things to ferment the glucose, which leads to mycotoxin, which then leads to cellular mutation, which leads to
Mhm.
things like cancer and autoimmunity and all these other problems, right? So this is why stress can actually slowly kill
Yeah.
you. So my neurochemical profile, serotonin dysregulated, so hypersensitive to details. My dopamine profile is slim to none. Very difficult for me to experience pleasure and reward because my receptors, genetically determined, are almost non-existent. And my neurochemical clearance is super
Mm.
fast. So I feel things way down here and it hardly lasts. So that in combined with
Mm.
the serotonin is like I see everything bugs me, I need to deal with everything, and I'm seeking reward. Nothing's good enough. I achieved something yesterday, done with that. I
Mhm.
need something bigger and bigger and bigger. So I was constantly taking on this load that no human should take, right? The warrior mentality.
Yeah.
So constant chronic stress, and I've had to coach myself and understand that I'm a borderline psychopath, you know? And I need to normalize how I deal with my work and my family and everything else. And that was a major load, removing the yes, I want to do that. Yes, I want to do that. Yes, I want to know. Focus. filter the noise, and drive one big thing home. And that changed a lot for me.
That's really cool because what's interesting about that is it's not just about treating a chronic condition that you're dealing with, but it's also kind of learning how to operate like efficiently and optimally in your own day to day, right? Because like some of the like what you now know about yourself, like some of those traits are actually a good thing, right? The fact that you like will look at a success tomorrow or a success from yesterday and be looking for a new one tomorrow is it could be a great thing, right? Something that could drive you forward. It could be something that really pushes you towards success. Like other people experience success and they're like, I made it, I'm at the top, like now I'm just going to relax, and maybe those people don't achieve as much. So there's some good that can be taken with that, but then like as you pointed out, it can lead to bad, right? It can lead to like overcommitting on things, taking on too many projects, completely burning yourself out. So that's really, I don't think a lot of people think about that with their DNA and genetics. Is it's maybe not just about what you're trying to fix, but like how to learn to operate with what you have too, and how to like put it, in the best place forward. Like, I'd have to assume you being successful pre starting the DNA company and your success with the DNA company, at least part of that is probably related to some of that, psychosis that you're talking about, like, some of that functional, that functional craziness that drives you every single day. Did that change the way that you operate, minus you trying to manage your workload a little bit differently and trying to prevent yourself from becoming overly stressed? Did that change the way that you looked at your work for the better in terms of like being able to push yourself in a
Yeah,
healthy
it
way
changed a
towards
lot,
success?
and a lot of it had to do with how I work with other
Hmm.
people, right? So I was just constantly
Mm,
disappointed with everybody, and I was constantly,
yeah.
yeah, expecting too much, and not able to work with people, and that prevented me from
Mm,
growing because you have to be able to work with people, right? Well, one thing
yeah.
I've learned, our team has done this really well, is we all know our neural maps, and we know who we are.
Yeah.
And earlier in when we first started this company, one of the co-founders has the exact opposite dopamine profile of me. The maximum density of receptors and a very
Mm,
slow clearance. So what does that equal? I considered him to be a flake because he
yeah.
had no drive because he's always satisfied. Right? Everything is good. So we'd
Yeah.
be in a meeting, here's 10 action items. Before we even walk out the door, I'm already feeling anxiety over when are these things getting done. For him, he's on his laptop looking up the next vacation. Like literally. And
Yeah.
what I realized is what I saw as a problem was actually his strength. His strength was the ability to say no to everything. He just didn't care until there was truly something valuable, and
Hmm.
then he would binge on it. Because his neurochemical clearance is so slow,
Mm,
when he finally found that reward or pleasure-seeking experience, he'd get stuck. And he'd do it for 8. So he would come back with this
mm,
like 10, 15 pages of work, like, wow, how did you do this? And so we learned then who we are, what we're good at, and remove the friction and learn how to work together as a team. So we do this with everybody in our company now.
yeah.
We know who we are. Our operations, officer, our CFO, like I know how they work and then how I work. And it's like, let the racehorse be the racehorse. Let the donkey plow the field. Like, let do what we do well, right? And now our team is really
Yeah.
fluid and awesome in that respect.
That's so cool because it's like, everybody always takes these, personality tests and these different things to figure out how to work with each other at work. I know at BioCoach, we have everybody take the principles exam from Ray Dalio's book, Principles. He has that exam, which it is really cool. Like there's, I think it's better than a lot of the other personality tests that are out there. There's really good insights that kind of highlights the different strengths and weaknesses for folks. But, what you guys are doing is actually looking at somebody's like biological makeup, like looking at their DNA to determine these things. And that could be huge because I would have to say, my DNA sample is actually at your lab right now being looked at. So I'll be waiting to see what my results are here soon. But I would actually have to say that I'm pretty similar to you in that sense of like, I kind of have that same little, like, I don't even like celebrating a success. Like I know, like when I like published my first book, like my family wanted to throw like a book party and I was like, no, I don't even want to
Yeah.
talk about it. Like on to the next thing, like get rid of it. Like, I'll finish like last week I was in Nashville and I gave a presentation and like my team was like telling me they're like, oh, like you did so good. I'm like, I don't even want to talk about it, like let's just get on to the next thing. And I feel that same thing you do, where I often get like annoyed with people
Yeah.
or like get frustrated when I don't feel like people are as like driven. But knowing that it's not Like, it's not like for somebody like myself, when you're not in the know, it can seem
Yeah.
like, well, that person's lazy, right? Like, I'm driven, that's a good thing. You're not, so you're lazy. But having that understanding, I feel like, can just make a huge difference. Like, this to me seems like an obvious, like, everybody, like, if you have a company, especially a small company, where you're having like a lot of, micro or macro interactions with each other, having this understanding is just going to make it so much easier to figure out, how you need to be interacting with people, whether it's somebody up the chain of command or down the chain of command, and how to kind of do that effectively, and understanding what their strengths are. Like, somebody who is like, constantly seeking reward,
Mm.
you can tee up their job in a certain way so that they can experience that, so they can, feel good in their job, be happy, and be productive. Whereas somebody who's, not that way, you could kind of tee up their job a little bit differently. So I really find that that's pretty fascinating that you guys have implemented that. Would you say, what do you think that's done to your work culture? Do you think that that's like, has this been something that everybody has been, really receptive to, and everybody's like enjoyed, and you think it's like progressed and made things
Yeah, I
better, or,
think
or
that
what's going
we
on there?
so when you're dealing with biotech and science, there's always this problem of too many chefs because everyone's a specialist. And you
Hmm.
can't this is why a lot of
Yeah.
science companies fail because everybody has their own direction, everybody has an ego, and everybody has insecurity. That's how scientists and academics are
Hmm.
wired. And that's why they do what they do. And
Yeah.
so that it has allowed us to have a fluid direction and culture because everybody sees that they're valued for what they are and who they are, as opposed to like what we were doing earlier was here's the core thing, but we all saw it different. And there was constant friction until we fixed it at this
Mm,
level. And by the way, this extends to the family too. We're talking about the corporate context.
right.
There isn't a single clinical interaction we have that doesn't become a counseling session. Somebody may come saying, "My
Mm,
mom had breast cancer. I don't want it. Please look at my DNA." Okay, we do that, and it always turns into, "Oh,
mm,
that's why I can't. This my husband does this thing, or my kid does this thing, or every single time because
wow.
nobody takes the time to understand how bio-individual we are at the neurochemical level, right? When you're parenting
Hmm.
and you have 3 kids, they all need to be disciplined differently. One may actually bind
Hmm.
onto trauma more efficiently than the other one. And you walk into a room, they just
Mm,
heard you, yelling at them for, watching TV, and then they hear you yelling at someone on the phone about a bill, and they think, "What did I do this time?" Right? Where the other kid has already turned the TV
yeah.
back on because he didn't even feel the
Hmm.
imprint of the trauma and the pain. So how do you discipline those kids? Very different. The structure of learning, the way
Yeah.
I we have my eldest kid needs a lot of structure because he, like my co-founder
Hmm.
partner, has a very high dopamine expression. So it's very hard for him to seek reward. But when you give him the structure, it's very hard for him to
Mm,
follow and get it done, right? And you have to create pleasure and reward in what he's doing. The other one's wired more like me, right? And so he needs like, as opposed to structure, he needs more sense of reward because he'll be doing the work and then on to the next thing, 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 right? So even in your
hmm.
own family, we're unique, regardless of genes coming from 2 people. Like that mix can equal very different things for your kids, you know?
Yeah. Well, that's huge too, because, it's like, I think about, so I have a little 18-month-old at home. It's my first child. And, you think about how, it's not always the case, but a lot of times in marriage, two people can be very different, right? Like, and they almost, a lot of times you'll hear that it's almost better, right? Like, rather than two people who are exactly the same, being married, it's better to have two people that are different. But now you're talking about like and I think that would be the case with me and my wife. Like, we're both, very different, kind of a yin and a yang type of thing. But now you're talking about the merging of those genetics and producing a child that, like, I'm thinking that the child is thinking like me, and my wife's thinking that the child's thinking like her. And the answer is that it's probably somewhere in between on all of it. And it's funny because, just as a kind of a personal story, I remember it was probably about 4 months ago, or yeah, maybe, yeah, 3 or 4 months ago, I was holding my child. I have a son. His name's Travers, and I was holding him, and I was talking to a friend, and we were in my house. I was talking to him, and it was kind of the first time I realized that my son was, that he was kind of aware of him not being paid attention to. It was kind of him kind of coming online a little bit and being like, "Oh, I'm not really like a part of this conversation. I'm not being paid attention to." And as I was holding him, he bit my shoulder when I was holding him, And I remember just like I didn't know what it was. I was kind of
Yeah.
like what was that? And I kind of like looked at him and I was confused. I didn't know what happened. So I put him back there and I continued talking. And then he bit me again. And I kind of like pulled him back again. I was just like, hey, like, no. And I pointed my finger. I was like, no. And I think I
Yeah.
gave him like a little tap on the butt, just a little tap. And he never did it again. But what I've noticed is over the last like 3 or 4 months, there'll be times where I'll be holding him. He'll lay his head on my shoulder, and out of nowhere, he'll just pull his head back and he'll look at me and he'll go, no. And he'll just like put his feet up. Like he
Yeah.
remembers that happening. And the whole time I've realized I was like, I don't think he knows, because he was too young to communicate. I don't think he knows why I was upset with him for doing that. He just
Yep.
remembers that I was upset with him for that interaction. And it's like, yeah, I mean, that would be a huge thing to know because, not that we always have the most control of our emotions. Like in that case, I was kind of acting, it was more of a reaction to how I was interacting with him, but having an understanding of how he's, learning and how he's experiencing discipline and all of these different things could definitely change the way that I parent, right? Like now as you're saying that, I'm just like, well, now I have to get him, sequenced too. I got to know more about what's going on with his DNA. Because it's like I think we always want to do what's best for our children and for our families. I think that's true of most people. But I think a lot of times we look through the lens of like everybody is thinking and looking at things
Mhm.
exactly the same as us. If you're somebody who doesn't deal with anxiety and you have a partner who does have anxiety and you give them that super helpful feedback of, oh, just don't worry about it, right? Um, and it's like, well, that doesn't really help anybody. So I think, yeah, it's interesting that like something like this can create some like kind of concrete thing that you can look at and say like, okay, this is how I need to be operating. So that kind of leads me, I want to talk a little bit more about the DNA company specifically of like how does that work, because like I said, I'm going through it right now. I've submitted my sample. It's at the lab now. I think it's a couple weeks and we get results back. What do those results, well, I guess we can kind of start the
Sure.
beginning of what the whole process looks like for anybody who listening to it, but I'm curious to learn more about what that looks like what type of practical information you get back, because I've done DNA testing in the past. I've done all kinds of different at-home testing, and a lot of times it's just like a report of like, here's what you got, like pat on the butt, get out the door, like good luck with it. But it sounds like you guys are doing a little bit
Yeah. So
something a little bit
well,
differently.
first of all, it's a saliva sample, so you're spitting in a tube, and we extract the DNA
Hmm.
and we sequence it, which means testing the DNA to tell you what version of what gene you have, and that's where genetics kind of ends, right? Genetics is here's your report,
Yeah.
here's your list of genes. Now go find someone to tell you what it all means. And if you go to 5 different people, they're going to tell
Hmm.
you 5 different things. So we realized the most important thing that was
Hmm.
missing was interpretation and also making it easy to use. Like I should be, all I want to know is what's wrong and how do I fix it? Right? I don't even need to know
Hmm.
why
Yep.
the genes behind it, right? I can geek
Yeah.
out, give me the information. I might spend some time, but just give it to me straight, right? So what we do
Yeah.
is we
Yep.
take all of what we've learned. We spent 3 years studying 7,000 people, and this is one thing that this is why we have the insights that we have, because we actually met with patients and spent hours like this reviewing them to understand their
Wow.
phenotypic traits, like how do they actually manifest their DNA into their physical being, how they behave, their healthcare history, why when it says 80% chance of something they didn't get it, what were they doing right, what can we learn from them? So all of that then gets put into our algorithm, and the reports are already interpreted. So now you log into 6 systems. So mood and behavior, which is going to talk about things like addiction, anxiety, depression, burnout, procrastination, neuroticism, all these things we deal with. You're going to look at diet, nutrition. Should I be a keto, vegan, and how do I metabolize starches? What's my insulin response? All that type of information. Everything about your sleep that we talked about, like can't fall asleep, can't stay asleep, environmental response and chemicals and how that's affecting your sleep, your circadian rhythm, your internal clock, how efficiently does that work? Then we look at hormones. So if I have your hormones, I don't need to meet you to understand what you look like. I know your facial structure. I know your body type. I know your athleticism. Yeah, yeah. I know if
Really?
you're a pear shape, if you're
Wow.
wiry, your hormones drive all of that. And I know if your goal is to be X and you're Y, exactly what it takes to get there, right? So hormones are driving all that. So
Wow.
we've mapped all that out. And then immunity. So everything about the health of the cell, which is where everything starts. How do you detoxify? How do you fight inflammation? How do you deal with oxidation? So everything around the health of the cell, and then the last thing is actually there's two more things. There's disease risks like cardiovascular, diabetes, and what's going on at the hardware level. So we're not telling you you have an 80% chance of cardiovascular disease. We're saying your arterial quality is not the best, so you're more prone to inflammation. ApoE is not the best. You don't transport lipids well. We're explaining the actual biological function so you can make sense out of it for any context. And the last thing is longevity. How does all of what I just told you get reinterpreted for adding 10, 15 healthy years to my life? Preventing cognitive decline, retaining
Hmm.
muscle, having good bone health. It's all reinterpreted for that purpose. So after going through all of that, we believe that most of genetics is noise. There's 22,000 genes that make up your genome. We're only looking at 90 of them because all of this is
Mm.
informed by those key systems that drive most chronic disease and aging.
Wow.
The rest of it is like, is my ear connected to
Hmm.
my head? I have a mirror. I don't need to pay for a DNA test, right? You know? So,
Right. Yeah.
yeah, we've brought it down to make it easy to the systems you actually need to know about that are functional in nature, that drive most of the problems. And now you ask me a question about anything, whether it's breast cancer, whether it's autism, whether it's what type of training you should do, we can answer it from these set of genes.
Wow. So then what does that, so you guys, you send the results back, and then do you kind of give
Yeah.
those recommendations, or is there some sort of like coaching that you sign up for to
So
ask
it's
those
both.
questions, or
They're
how does
right
that
in the
work?
reports, and this is a big part that was missing is the actionable items, recommendation. What do I do, right? So in each section, in
Right.
each micro report, there's recommendations for each micro section. So you can look up anxiety, see what the problem is, and then there's recommendations for that specifically. So you can work on whatever you want to work on. There's things like habit
Yeah.
formation, habit removal, supplements, diet. We worked with Dr. BJ Fogg, so he wrote the book Tiny Habits, right? You
Yeah.
got it? Yeah.
Yep. It's right back here. Let's see.
There you go.
Right there.
So he runs the
Yep.
Stanford University Behavioral Change Lab, and we know what we're not good at. So we said, hey, we've understood what people need to know. We don't know how to make sure they actually do it. So we gave him all of our reports. He spent a
Yeah.
year plugging all these behavioral change components and language right into the report. So when you read it, it reads like, "Oh, I already know this." It's so simple and easy. It's kind of like I already do this stuff, but you don't. But that's why we're talking to you. And it has to be that
Yeah.
easy in order for it to be actionable and for it to stick. So there's a separate recommendation for each report, and that was all written by Dr. BJ Fogg.
Wow. Super interesting. So then what's the delivery of that? Is that in an app, or is it in an
Well,
email
you'll get an
afterwards? How
email
do people get
notifying you to
that?
log into your portal. And we do it digitally as opposed to a paper
Hmm.
report so that we can update it. We want you to 6 months from now
Yeah.
log in and learn something new without paying more. It's constant learning on our end. We'll keep updating the algorithm. So it's a digital portal. Kind of looks like Netflix. You're like clicking on tiles and drilling into things, and you're learning. There's also
Nice.
a separate piece to the portal because we understand some people do want to dive deeper and kind of geek out on the genes. And they want that clinical experience
Hmm.
of, "Tell me about my DNA. I don't wanna look up anxiety, tell me about the genes."
Hmm.
So we built what we call a GeneCast, which is a personalized podcast for each individual. Our AI pulls on all these audio files and
Mm.
gives you what you need to hear for you. So DRD2 gene means
Wow.
how dense your dopamine receptors are and will determine, your experience with pleasure and reward. You happen to have the GG version, so you have optimal density, which means that you experience pleasure at a high level, which means you're constantly satisfied. Da 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 da. Right? So it's as if you're sitting with that virtual coach
Yeah.
explaining your DNA to you. Now, having said all that, because we are handing over information to a consumer, there's certain things we're not allowed to say, regulatory wise. So we do have coaches that are functional genomics trained that can get into deep clinical programs. Suppose it's like, hey, take all of this, and I'm an executive, and build me a 4 month plan for how I add 10 years to my life. We can do that. Or it's like, spend a
Hmm.
month with me and tell me why I can't lose these last 10 pounds. Help me figure that out. So we have
Yeah.
coaches that can do that type of work, from MDs to naturopaths to health coaches, whatever is required for the problem.
Super interesting. No, I think that's, I mean, you guys are adding the missing piece to the puzzle. Like I said, I've done some other, the at home, genetic testing in the past, and it's like, yeah, you get these things back, and you get, some risk stuff, or you'll see like, oh, your body looks like it might do a little bit better with this type of diet or that type of diet, but nothing that's actually like practical, like what you guys are pointing out here. And one of the questions I have is, we talk about some of these different issues, like, and I'll kind of use some of
Sure.
the brain focused ones. So let's say like the dopamine receptor saturation. So you have, like somebody who has more dopamine receptors or somebody who has less dopamine receptors. How much of that is like, how much of that is actually changeable versus having to learn to operate with what you already have? So like in the example, like I think, the story that you had told about your niece was that, she, I think, had, I think it was dopamine, where she had like a low number of the receptors, but she also had a high amount of the enzyme that clears dopamine. So she kind of had both of those things going. And in like the case that you're talking about yourself, where you're like, I'm somebody who, I kind of clear, I have like a low amount and I clear it really fast. So, I kind of have to constantly seek reward. And like part of what your story has been like learning
Yeah.
how to manage that with your lifestyle. But how much of that can you look at and say, well, like, yeah, I could learn to work with this, but, I would rather just like feel better. I'd rather kind of get a bigger dopamine, hit and feel good when something good happens to me. How much of that kind of stuff is
So it
actually
is it
changeable?
is changeable, and it's a question of context.
Mhm.
And what we see is
Mhm.
when, labels like anxiety, ADHD, depression, the majority of those things don't exist. Yes, there is depression, there's a chemical
Mhm.
imbalance. That's a tiny fraction of the people that are actually being diagnosed with it, right? So what's actually going on is
Mhm.
everybody is wired with an innate superpower when it comes to their neurochemicals. You are wired to
Mhm.
do something great. I am wired to be a warrior on the front lines, building stuff and taking crazy risks. If I put myself in a context
Yeah.
of just staying at home and trying to be a family guy, I'm gonna get depressed, right? So I have
Yeah.
2 potential outcomes, or dopamine also powers pleasure, so I could go down the addiction route and be an addict. So I am wired for 3 things: depression, addiction,
Mhm.
achievement. My context will determine which
Mm.
bucket I end up, and guess what? I've experienced all 3 because I've had different contexts at
Mm.
different times of my life. Okay? So that's one
Yeah.
thing, is to understand there's no right or wrong when it comes to neurochemicals. There's who you are, knowing what you're designed for, what jobs you're good at, and to do those jobs, not do the wrong jobs that are going to cause friction and frustration. And
Yeah.
then words like anxiety and burnout will start to happen. Right. So that's one. Second thing is
Mhm.
there's a lot of things you can do to upregulate or downregulate genes or the innate function, like the neurochemical. Like, for example, when my niece had her issue, she's exactly the same as me, like you said, no dopamine, fast clearance, can't feel pleasure.
Mhm.
Um, I gave her L-theanine, which is a known dopamine upregulator. Cold therapy is a known. This is why I love skiing so much, because I love the cold. I go out. I spent my entire winter
Mhm.
in shorts, and I live in Toronto, right?
Yeah.
Because the cold
Yeah.
gives me that dopamine hit. Well, yeah, so now
Wow.
now there's no right or wrong. I'm not trying to fix anything, because keep in mind, when it comes to my work,
Mhm.
this is what makes me successful. But when it comes to going on
Exactly, yeah.
vacation, I'm dysfunctional. I need to turn
Right.
on the right neurochemicals to be able to actually be in the right state where the family and friends around me don't see me as a psychopath again, right? So it's about a
Right.
context, and you know, don't deny your innate superpower, own it, and use it for the thing
Mhm.
you're supposed to do on this planet. But also understand that when things are disruptive to some other context, you can change them. Let me give you one simple example of that. So, um,
Yeah.
people from Finland are known to have, um, just in general, bad BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor. BDNF speaks to
Mhm.
neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to develop new neural pathways. The outcome of that, if you have bad
Mhm.
neuroplasticity and bad BDNF, is that your mood is more like drama queen response. Everything means a lot. Crying over
Mm.
spilt milk, right?
Mhm.
Meanwhile,
Yeah.
Finland is rated the happiest country in the world. Doesn't add up because these people that should
It
not be
doesn't add up.
happy, that should be constantly complaining, neurotic, annoyable, frustrated, all of that stuff, but they're rated the happiest country in the world. Um, there's more saunas in Finland per capita than any country in the world. Sauna is a potent upregulator of BDNF. So they
Mm,
have this cultural habit and they don't know why they do it. And if they don't do it, they don't feel right. So they make sure they do it, but they don't actually know at the science level what's happening. What's happening is that their BDNF sucks,
yeah.
which makes them grumpy and drama queens, but they're happy because they do the sauna every single day, part of their culture. And the day they don't
Hmm.
do it, they don't feel right, which is why they keep doing it. Right. And you can go on
Yeah.
and on and on with every neurochemical and there's supplements and there's things you can do and there's a lot you can do to up and down regulate things.
Yeah. Well, no, that's, I mean, that's absolutely brilliant. And it's because, again, like it's very, I think that a lot of what you're saying about yourself, I think is very similar for me. And it's some stuff that I think about a lot about how, the way that I am, I think is something that drives me to like, I love to work. I can work long extended hours. I don't feel like I get burnt out. I can really push myself. But then when I end up in moments like being on a vacation or trying to spend a couple hours in the morning with my son, I feel myself getting anxious because I'm like, I'm not accomplishing things right now. I'll try my best to put myself in mindsets of like, well, I am accomplishing something right now. Like I'm helping the development of my son. I'm spending time with him. I'm teaching him sports and reading books to him and all these things, but something just doesn't click, right? And I think like I've found things to help mitigate some of that. Like I know for me that if I get up and I go, like it's worth it for me to get an hour less of sleep to wake up in the morning and go to the gym, because if I go to the gym and I hit the sauna and then I go into parenting for a couple of hours before work, I feel like I've already accomplished something. So I have less anxiety during that time versus if I just wake up in the morning and I just jump right into parenting the whole time. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
I need to be starting work right now and I'm frustrated. I'm not getting anything done. Like I'll be outside like trying to do push-ups in between taking care of my kid because I just want to like accomplish something. But that would be great to be able to know that like, okay, I don't want to completely like dull myself or numb myself of what makes me me, but in these certain contexts, like when I'm being a dad or when I'm on a vacation or when I'm trying to unplug, that I could supplement with this certain thing or I could practice this certain behavior that would allow me to feel good in those situations. Because it's not a help to anybody if when I'm trying to be a good parent, if I'm anxious the whole time, right? Like that's not going to be good for myself or my son or my family or anybody. So I think that's the type of practicalness that I think is so unique about what you guys are doing. I've said this several times during the podcast, but like that's actually actionable, right? It's not just about like, here's your DNA, either deal with it or try to fix it. It's like the context, like you said, like use it, like it's your superpower in some ways. So like use it for good and then try to mitigate like the bad with it. It's like it's like the Incredible Hulk almost, right? Like the Incredible Hulk, like when he turns really big, like he can use that for good, or he can also smash up a whole city and destroy everything, right? And like one of those is good, the other one is bad. So I think that's just brilliant. I'd love to get so to kind of wrap it up. What is one of the most interesting or unique success stories that you guys have had, whether it's with somebody at your company or a client or patient or customer for you guys? What's one of the most interesting ones, or maybe one that would be really applicable to somebody listening here, of like seeing what is actually achievable through
Yeah.
working with the DNA
Well, the
company?
first one that came to mind, because it truly speaks of root cause and what's really important. So, what do we actually do?
Hmm.
That central hub, if you figure out a system failure in your body, all these symptomatic spokes come out of that same thing. So, if you fix this one thing, this
Hmm.
is why people tell us, oh, my nails and my hair look better and I'm sleeping better. And we weren't even trying to fix that, right? Innate. If you fix the central hub,
Yeah.
everything gets better. So there's a lady we were dealing with actually here in Toronto who was elderly, and there was zero intention of fixing this thing. She came through a clinician that sells our DNA test and said, "I just want to have the best supplements. I don't take anything. Tell me what to take." So the clinician said, "If you take this DNA test, it will tell you exactly what you need and will custom make the supplements for you." So we did that. We
Mm.
made whatever she needed through this clinician. It was delivered to her just to optimize and feel good. That was the only intention.
Hmm.
So this lady was in a car accident 2 years prior, and she had, damaged her arm from her elbow to her hand and completely lost feeling of this part of her limb. And she went to, I think, neurologist and was
Mm,
told that you have nerve damage and it's done. This is a write-off. Just manage it, right? So about 2
yeah.
weeks into the supplement regimen, she woke up with pain in her hand. And she called her doctor the next day saying, "What's going on? I took those supplements and now my hand is hurting." She said, "Well, that's a good sign because your nerves are coming back." "Oh, what do you mean?" So
Mm,
anyways, it was left at that. She battled this for a little while. There was pain. 6 weeks into it, she had full function of her fingertips to her elbows, which she didn't have for 2 years. And all that happened
wow.
was when we looked at her genetics, we saw that her methylation, so methylation is 2 things. In a simple nutshell, anti-inflammatory response, your body fighting inflammation. It also is your genes expression response. So your genes are constantly responding to every environmental stress or nutrition cue to balance and respond as appropriate for whatever is coming in. Methylation turns those dials, right?
Hmm.
So she had horrible methylation. And because she had horrible methylation, the inflammation she suffered at her age of the impact created what we call neural inflammation, literally suffocating the nerves. And it just hadn't gone away because her body doesn't deal with methylation well. So in her profile, we saw
Wow.
that she needed a very specific form of B12 called adenosine, not methylcobalamin, which is what you typically find in a store. And she needed it under her tongue, sublingual. So there's genes that determine all of these different jobs. She also needed
Huh.
folinic acid. So when you get pregnant, you just went through this, you're told take folic acid, right? It's very important. Some
Hmm.
women don't process that
Hmm.
well. They need folinic, and there's a gene that determines that. So there was other things in her formula as well, but these were the two things that hyper resolved the methylation, got rid of the inflammation, and in 6 weeks, those nerves that we were told were dead were just not being choked anymore and were functioning.
Wow.
Yeah. And this is
Unreal.
why forget about what your
Unreal.
problem is. Solve the system failure and you cannot have a problem. You should feel
Yeah.
the way you felt when you were 18. That's how you should die. You full of
Hmm.
energy, everything is
That's
firing
crazy.
properly. We do things to ourselves to create problems that block and choke and inflame, and then you get sick. None of that needs to happen if you solve the hub, the central problem.
Wow. I mean, that's one, that's just a crazy success story, and I can't imagine how grateful that lady must feel for working with you guys. And it's just like, you wonder how many people out there are dealing with, I mean, you see it all the time with things like chronic diseases where people kind of feel like this is their fate, like, oh, I have, I'm pre-diabetic or I have cardiovascular disease, and this is just what I have to do. This is a drug that I have to take. But then you wonder about situations like that where people are dealing with, crippling, just debilitative conditions, whether it's from an accident like the case of that woman, or something like a mental health disorder, that they feel like
Yeah,
they can't even leave their house. And it's like, what could be the, there might be like a simple, well, shouldn't say simple, because as you pointed out, it's rather complex, right? It's not just about knowing which supplement, but knowing what form to take it and then how to take it and all, what to take with it and all of these things. But that there's something that can actually be done, that is, very much within the realm of what we can all do. Like in that case, taking some B vitamins is something that we can all do. That's not something, it's not like it's
yeah,
several $1,000 treatment that you have to do a couple times a week. I'm sure that was something that she was probably able to buy, over the counter, to treat this condition, to actually get feeling of her arm back. That's just completely wild. So I really encourage, I'm going to be doing a lot of posts about this on my social media platforms in the coming weeks as I get the results back, and trying to highlight this type of stuff for people. I'm really excited to get to kind of marry the two together. My content's always been about taking control of your health, and doing all the different lifestyle changes, diet, exercise, hormetic stressors, all of these different things to help improve your health and wellness. But I'm really excited to be able to kind of couple this with like a more,
mm,
like, I guess, educated approach, based on your personalized, DNA and everything. So definitely encourage everybody to check that out as I share about it. Where can everybody go? I'm going to be dropping some links to the DNA company, but I know that you also put out a ton of great content yourself. So first, where can people go to learn more about yourself and follow more of your work? And then where can people go to learn more about the DNA company and
sure.
then work with
So
the DNA
we
company?
do put out content for the purpose of educating our customers. So now I have these DNA results. What do I do? So we built a podcast called
Yeah.
Unpilled, so the Unpilled podcast, to teach people how to use this stuff and where to apply it. And then there's a ton. You don't need a DNA test to benefit from there. There's a ton of amazing interviews there. And then my
Cool.
personal Instagram, I try and tell stories about all of what we're learning, either the science in the background of what's really happening, or success stories, or genetic stories. So it's all on there. It's Cash Khan, so it's not my full name. KASHKHAN official. So Cash Khan official. And we're constantly teaching. You'll see some mind blowing stuff on there that you wouldn't hear anywhere else. In terms of the website,
Yeah.
don't go running to the website to buy the test, because I think you're offering a discount here, right? So we're going to give that to everybody. So
Hmm.
the website is
Yep.
thednacompany.com and /thinking health. And when you get to the checkout, you'll have a discount. So just use that. Don't buy retail. Might as well save some money.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll definitely by the time you've gotten to this part of the episode, you probably had a little ad read in the middle where I'll kind of give you guys the discount code for this. But yeah, I think, just really appreciate you coming on and sharing this, and really welcome everybody to go check out the content that you guys are putting out, because like you said, it's not just for people who are taking the test. There's a lot of really good, useful stuff. And you can kind of go get your feet wet, learn a little bit more about the company and yourself, and then, figure out if this is something for you. I don't think that there's anybody that this isn't for. I think that everybody could benefit from these insights. Everybody could learn something that could help them optimize their life in some way. So really encourage everybody to go check that out. Kashif, really appreciate you coming on here, man. I think, I have such a long list of questions that we didn't even get to. So, whether it's me linking up with you at another conference in the future, or having you back on for another episode, I know I'll have a lot of questions for you, but really appreciate you coming on, and thank you for the great work that you're doing, because it's
No,
obvious
it's
that
a
it's
pleasure,
changing a lot
man.
of
We're happy
lives.
to be here. You're doing amazing stuff, helping people learn. So we're happy to be here.